My story dates back to 2003, shortly after I turned 15. Music had begun to occupy a central place in my life, and I decided to study it more formally. Since I was young, my fascination with antiques, history, and architecture had shaped my imagination. I was a solitary child, and music became my refuge. I started my classes in a school located in an old house in the city center. From the very first moment I stepped in, I knew I had found a special place. Its long hallways and rooms evoked a vibrant past, and I lost myself in the history of the people who had inhabited that space. The stained glass in the main hall captivated me immediately. With more than 3 meters in height, it filtered light in a magical way, filling the atmosphere with vibrant colors. Being in that hall was like traveling to another era, where elegance and sophistication danced together in a play of light. Every time I studied there, I felt time stop, allowing me to connect with the roots of music. I spent hours observing how the sparkles of the crystals changed with the daylight, creating a visual spectacle that stimulated my creativity and fueled my passion. Behind the house, I discovered a courtyard adjacent to a crumbling large structure. Its size surprised me. Spaces in the city center are rarely so expansive. My curiosity was piqued, and I began to investigate the property's history. I spoke with the caretaker and read informative plaques, revealing that the place had been a cockfighting arena, inaugurated in the 20th century, where concerts and operas were held in the 19th century. I learned that the building's foundations date back to the 17th century, which only intensified my attachment to this space full of history and mystery. The connection I felt to that environment was powerful. It was a bond that went beyond the physical. It was a love for the past and what those spaces represented. Each visit to the courtyard filled me with nostalgia and awe. However, sometimes that emotion blended with a strange unease, a feeling of being watched. Despite being a place that should feel safe, there were moments when I felt vulnerable, as if the walls held secrets that peered at me from the shadows. When that happened, I would leave the place quickly, though always with a sense of strangeness. My classmates and I began sharing ghost stories during breaks. One afternoon, one of them mentioned that the old caretaker had spoken of a wandering soul haunting the place. The idea that something supernatural could be present awakened in me a mix of fear and fascination. With each tale, the story of the old building became more vivid and enigmatic. Those moments of camaraderie and mystery not only strengthened my bonds with my classmates, but also helped me understand the significance of the places we inhabit. Filled with memories and echoes of the past, wandering through the halls dressed as a nun, I remained incredulous at the stories I heard. They spoke of a nun who supposedly scared several people by appearing in what used to be the chapel of the house, now a classroom. They also mentioned a black charo seen in the back of the school. My disbelief didn't waver, but I couldn't help associating the charo with the area that overlooked the Plaza de Gallos. A classmate recounted that some men had broken in to rob the place, jumping over a low wall that led to the backyard. Neighbors heard their screams and called the police as the thieves fled in panic. What was strange was what they claimed. A being shaped like a charo approached them slowly, emitting an unsettling laugh every time they tried to escape. The story of the charo seemed fantastic. I wasn't sure if the caretaker had told it to scare my classmate or if he had made it up. However, another friend from guitar class told me that in a 2-story classroom where there were no stairs, the entire class witnessed a table moving on its own. Although they tried to ignore it, what truly unsettled them was the creaking of the ceiling, as if someone were stealthily walking above it. This story also seemed dubious, but my friend offered to take me to his teacher to confirm. I didn't think that was appropriate, so I decided to let it go and continue my study. Unintentionally, I overheard a conversation between the new caretaker and some staff members. They mentioned that the neighbors from the adjacent house frequently asked if anyone stayed overnight, as they often heard running footsteps and doors slam. It was curious because the doors were large and wooden, and for the neighbors to hear those bang, it would have required a lot of force. It's worth noting that the caretakers never stayed overnight. Their job was log entries and exits, assist with moving instruments, ensure no one remained inside before turning off the lights and locked school. All these stories seemed merely fantastic, like tales meant to scare children. Bad horror. I never imagined that something could happen to me. A few days after that chat, I decided to stay and study in the glass hall, as usual. Everything seemed normal. That day, I chatted with the caretaker, who already knew I was the last to leave. I accompanied him to turn off the lights in the backyard. The full moon illuminated everything beautifully. In that setting, I would expect something unsettling to happen. But on the contrary, everything was wonderfully serene under the moonlight. It was a magical moment, where every corner shone with a special glow. The backyard, lit in bluish and white tones, was a spectacle that only the caretaker and I could appreciate. It was a lovely night, or at least I thought so at that moment. The atmosphere was calm, almost magical, and I let myself be carried away by the beauty of life. While I enjoyed the peace of that moonlit night, the ghost stories and apparitions seemed very distant. I felt fortunate to behold that glow, every shadow, every glimmer. However, a small part of me couldn't help but think of the legend surrounding the school. As I conversed with the caretaker, I remembered my friend's warning, rumors about the nun and the Charo, but at that moment, all I wanted was to enjoy the beauty of the night and let my imagination soar. When I got home, I greeted my parents and finished my homework before preparing to sleep like any other night. However, that night I had a dream that turned into a nightmare. I had never experienced anything so terrifying before. The setting was the beautiful house that fascinated, which I had seen moments before going to bed. At first, everything seemed normal, illuminated by the moonlight, but soon I felt a growing unease. My heart began to race. I tried to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch endless and my legs felt heavier and heavier. Finally, I reached the second hallway where I could see the door leading to the patio. I stopped in front of the door to the stained glass room and opened it. The light poured in through the glass and everything looked clear, but a sense of fear overtook me. At the back, I saw a figure hanging from one of the beams, dressed in an old white dress. Her long hair covered her face, and something about her posture filled me with deep terror, even though I knew I was dreaming. I tried to scream, thinking my parents or my sister would come to wake me, but I couldn't make a sound. The terror intensified, and the situation felt very real. When that figure began to move, my heart stopped. I realized she was now looking at me. I tried to back away, but suddenly, she detached from the ceiling and lunged at me with terrifying speed. I felt trapped, as if I had no way to escape. Close to me, the figure had a distorted face, and I could feel her presence in a frightened way. Her cold breath enveloped me, and in an instant, a heart-wrenching scream echoed in my ears. It was as if many voices joined together in one scream. Covering my ears with my hands, I began to pray, feeling my soul return to my body, though I still couldn't move. The feeling of terror persisted like we were trapped in an endless loop. Finally, I managed to move, and the scream began to fade away. I opened my eyes and, still trembling, covered myself with the blankets until morning. That night was unforgettable, and the next day I only told my parents that I had a bad night. When I returned to school, I wanted to tell my friend, but the fear of being ridiculed stopped. I decided to keep it a secret. Despite everything, I was eager to return to music school and relive the beauty of that house. After all, it had just been a dream, and I shouldn't stigmatize the place I love so much. I remember that afternoon being very pleasant, and I was delighted to hear that school had purchased 2 new pianos, one of which was in the famous stained glass room. I was eager to finish my classes so I could play them. After finishing one of my classes around 7:30, I realized I had enough time to try out the new instrument before my next class, which started at 8. However, time flew by, and it was already past 8 when I noticed. I quickly left the classroom, leaving the light on, confident that there were still classes in the back room where there was enough light. I returned to the stained glass room to play one last time before going into my final class. When I left, I closed the door and turned off the light. I headed to the classroom with my classmates, but when I found there were no chairs, I remembered there were several in the other room and went to get one. When I returned for the third time to stained glass room, I noticed the hallway was completely dark and the teachers in the back had already left. I entered without turning on the light and immediately felt a chill run down my spine. As the feeling of fear grew, I realized the room was illuminated just like in the dream I had a few days prior. Just then, I heard a heavy bolt sliding in a metal door that led to the back patio. I thought it might be the guard, so I hurried to exit, trusting that he would pass by at any moment. With the chair in hand, I tried to close the double doors, but I didn't want to look back, as if something was telling me to do so. Instinctively, I turned around and my heart stopped when I realized that just a few meters away, there was a very tall man, easily over 2 meters. He wasn't the guard. This being was much taller than me. The little light that came from the first hallway allowed me to see that his legs disappeared into the darkness, and a long, dark cloak hung from his shoulders. His face was shrouded in shadow, with only faint lips visible. An abominable terror washed over him. The figure began to approach very, very close. It was so near that if I had stretched out my arm, I could have touched it. Although I knew it wasn't human, my hand was stuck on the doorknob out of panic. Meanwhile, I was gripping the chair tightly. I managed to break free and ran, colliding with the wall of one of the classrooms. I took the hallway and reached my classroom, still holding the chair in my hand. Strangely, I never let it go during time. From the moment I left the room until my return, not even 2 minutes passed, but it felt like an eternity. When I entered the classroom and saw my classmates, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Most looked at me strangely since I rushed into the room, and some asked if I was okay because I looked pale. I didn't bring it up at that, nor did I discuss it with anyone for months after. I didn't know if it was my imagination or if I really saw something, but days after that encounter, I fell into a deep depression. I lost weight drastically, isolated myself from people. Some said that this being had stolen my energy, while others insisted it was just my mind playing tricks. Even today, every time I remember that figure emerging from the darkness or the dream I had, a chill runs through my body. Over time, I continued studying despite the challenge. One day, we were informed that we would be moving to a new building, and to my surprise, we were relocating to the old municipal jail. That's another story, but it was a sad place that meant so much to me. Whenever I return to my hometown, I try to visit those beautiful buildings. They were part of my family, and I am sure I will never be able to detach. In a way, those places are a part of it. I thank those who took the time to read or listen to this account. I know it's lengthy. I share it with love, as it has been a part of a truly intense and transformative phase of my life. I'm leaving photos of the main patio, where you can see the stained glass and the fountain that led to the back patio. Have a good night.